Many pro-life Christians are understandably discouraged by President Joe Biden's immediate actions removing protections from the unborn. Is there hope for the unborn in America? Is there reason to think the pro-life movement can continue the gains it's made over the last 20 years and indeed the whole last 48 years since Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973, including during the administration of President Donald Trump? With the March for Life, year in and year out, one of the largest demonstrations in Washington, D.C., going virtual in the time of COVID, Mallory Quigley, Vice President of Communications for the Susan B. Anthony List, joins us tonight on From the Stacks to talk about Roe v. Wade, the March for Life, the state of the pro-life movement, and the challenges and opportunities arising from the inauguration of President Biden. Please ask your friends to join you in watching tonight as we discuss what's ahead for the March for Life under COVID and the pro-life movement under a Biden presidency. Good evening and welcome to From the Stacks for this evening. I'm coming to you from a different place from usual. I'm in Georgia at my daughter's home, where a couple of days ago I got the privilege of watching our 11th grandchild be baptized, and we're very excited about that. So coming to you from a different place now. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'm Cal Beisner. I'm the founder and national spokesman of the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. We are a network of evangelical Christian scientists, economists, and theologians and policy wonks dedicated to educating the public and policymakers on biblical earth stewardship, economic development for the very poor, and the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's exciting to be able to do all of these things, and all of it requires your support. And this month, as a way of saying thank you, when you make a donation of any size, 100% tax deductible, we would love to send you a copy of a new monograph called The Red and the Green, China's Useful Idiots, which exposes how the Chinese Communist Party is using environmental organizations and their members from the grassroots right up to the very tops of those organizations to further its own agenda for world domination. All you need to do is just go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, and as you fill out the donation, when you come to the comments section, just write in there the red and the green, or promo code 21-01, or both, and we'll be glad to send you this wonderful monograph totally free. Our guest this evening is Mallory Quigley. She is Vice President of Communications for the Susan B. Anthony List, and she joins us from just outside, or actually inside Washington, D.C. That's right. That's where your office is, right?
Actually, just outside, yeah, in Arlington, Virginia.
Arlington, okay. Mallory, thanks very much for joining us here this evening. Before we get started, please tell our viewers about your own background in the pro-life movement. What got you started? What have you done through the years? How'd you come to serve with the Susan B. Anthony List, and what do you do there?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Cal, for this opportunity. I'm so glad to be speaking with you. I have been involved with Susan B. Anthony List for the last 11 years. I started as an intern. I was always very interested in politics, and also was very pro-life from a young age, although for a time in college, I was concerned about the pro-life movement and did actually consider myself pro-choice for a year or two. It was Dr. Hadley Arkes' book, The First Things, which of course the magazine is came from the book, but he sort of laid out the argument very concretely, taking us through the natural law, and my pro-life beliefs were affirmed. And I thought that the getting involved in politics, using the tool that was given to us by the founders to change law and in turn also have an impact on the culture, that this is where I wanted to spend my working hours, standing up
Mm.
for the unborn. And I have found that my particular vocation at Susan B. Anthony List and within the pro-life movement is to communicate the truth in love. And in my role as VP of Communications and leading the communications team, I find that I'm often speaking to people who don't agree with us on the life issue, but always coming back to what's at stake. And just speaking the truth in love is my number one motto and rule when I'm here at work.
Oh, that's great. Arks's book is truly a foundational work, in not just
Yes,
in the pro-life movement, but in the whole understanding of how to apply natural rights theory and biblical law as well to the whole question of human rights. You know, if you're not alive, you can't exercise your rights to
right.
freedom of speech or association or religion or anything else. So life is really sort of the first right, and it's not surprising, therefore, that in the Declaration of Independence we start right off with endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So you can't exercise liberty, can't pursue happiness if you don't have life. So
That's exactly right.
what about the Susan B. Anthony list itself? Tell us about it. When did it begin? How many people
Yeah.
are involved? What does it do?
Yes. Well, the Susan B. Anthony List was founded in 1992, which was an election year, and it was dubbed the Year of the Woman for the record number of women who were elected to Congress that year. Uh, Barbara Boxer, Dianne Feinstein, some of these notable pro-abortion women who are just giants on Capitol Hill. And Marjorie Dayton Felser, who is the president of Susan B. Anthony List, she was working
Mhm.
with pro-life Democrats and Republicans at the time for the pro-life caucus, the bipartisan pro-life caucus on the Hill. And she looked around and said, the women that have just been elected into office don't represent me and a lot of the women that I know. And we need a place for pro-life women, and we need a political arm that's going to support pro-life women in politics, so that because we know that women have a unique role to play in this battle, we're the ideal spokespeople, not the only, but the ideal. And so it began as a bundling operation, talking to political donors who about the candidates that were running across the states, running for Congress, and writing small checks and getting together a group of 20 donors to write a check out to a candidate and send it to them in a bundled package, so that it sent a message when the money arrived. This is coming from pro-life people who believe in you, who want you to go to Washington to carry out a pro-life agenda. And so it's really grown exponentially since 2010, which is when we were involved in fighting back against the abortion drug mandate in Obamacare, and working to hold pro-life Democrats, people who call themselves pro-life, accountable to their position. And we've really just expanded incredibly since 2010, adding on a super PAC and a research arm. In the last election cycle, we spent $52 million to elect pro-life champions in the Senate and the House and at the statewide level, and including 29 pro-life women who are joining the ranks of Congress. So while we still have a special emphasis on women candidates, now we also support men. And it's really about educating grassroots, holding leaders accountable, and supporting them when they're in office, and making sure that if you're pro-life, we will support you. And if you're not, we'll make sure that to replace you with someone who is.
Fantastic. I had actually intended to ask you about that, the election of so many new pro-choice, pro-life women to the House of Representatives later on in the programs. But since you just brought it up,
Sure.
tell me a bit about that. Is this a pretty historic thing? How many of these were there, and where did they
Yeah.
come from? I
Yes.
know some of them are fairly surprising in terms of where they've come from.
Oh yeah. Look at this beautiful graphic here of all of the new pro-life women. I misspoke. It's 29 total. So 18 new pro-life women joining 11 returning incumbents. And some of the faces that we're looking at right here in the center, Maria Salazar from Florida. She's the daughter of
Mhm.
Cuban immigrants. She interviewed Fidel Castro. So she's bringing a unique perspective. To her right, Nancy Mace. She's a single mom from South Carolina. Up
Mhm.
there in the top row left, that is Representative Young Kim, the first Korean
Yeah,
American Republican woman, I believe. She's coming from California. And
yeah.
we've got a whole lot of firsts. The first Iranian American woman in Congress, and Michelle Fishbach from Minnesota. She is a pro-life champion. Her husband works for the Right to Life committee out there. These are really incredible women coming from across the country.
So this is a clear indication of the fact that the whole pro-life movement is all about how to oppress women, and it's men oppressing women, right? Denying them their right to reproductive freedom. Is that what we see here?
Uh, that's one way to interpret it. Women looking to take away, other women's so-called rights. No, I think that this is, a celebration of pro-life, pro-woman values, and a rejection of the false choice that women need to sacrifice their own children in order to succeed in whether that's as a business owner, as a civic leader. The fact, we should never have to break the rights of one group to build up the rights of another.
Yeah.
That's profoundly anti-life, anti-woman itself. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and these, the women that fought for suffrage, fought for the women's right to vote. They believe firmly that we couldn't sacrifice another group's civil liberties and right to life in the effort to bring about the good of women's suffrage. So it's
Mhm.
we're really proud of these new women and are looking forward to see what they bring to the national conversation.
Well, excellent. Well, in 3 more days now, we have the annual March for Life coming up. And it's only once in the past have I been able to participate in it, and it was an inspiring experience for me, as I'm sure it is for thousands, even hundreds of thousands of people every year. Now, although the March for Life itself isn't a project of the Susan B. Anthony list, y'all have, of course, been allies with those who put it together for years. What are your own hopes for it personally this year, particularly granted, Mallory, that it's going to be virtual for the first time, and in light of the fact that it takes place so soon after the inauguration of President Joe Biden?
Yeah. Normally the march takes place on the anniversary of Roe versus Wade, which in this case would have been last Friday. But because of the inauguration, the schedule did get changed around. And of course, Washington, D.C. has just been dealing with so much. There's a lot of turmoil going on in our nation, to say the least. And
Yeah.
so it is sad that we will not have, and disappointing that we won't have the big march every year. I think as someone who works year round to and is, this is really my vocation to fight for life. It's always so uplifting to see people come from across the country to be a voice for the unborn, and to fill the streets, flood the streets of Washington, D.C., flood the metro, to see young kids
Yeah.
from from Catholic high schools from across the country, and their enthusiasm. It's really an uplifting time, and it's of course going to look a little bit different this year being virtual, but I do hope that this is a moment of unity for pro-life people across the country, that we are all have this period to remember that life unites. That's actually the theme for the march this year. Together, stronger, life unites. And one of the things that Susan B. Anthony List is doing to promote this message is um, we're releasing new research from our research arm, the Charlotte Lozier Institute, about the pregnancy center movement and the incredible gains that have been made in the
Yeah.
last few years. These centers that are increasingly medicalized, that are providing, it's not just here's some diapers, mom, and be on your way, but coming alongside women and the baby's father, if they're in the picture, or their, the family, the support system, and providing material, financial, spiritual, emotional support. And there's really just incredible work that's being done to love both mom and baby. And we're really proud to be able to share this report that has come out on the work of pro-life pregnancy centers nationwide. So I hope
Yeah.
that it's a moment for unity in the pro-life movement.
Yeah, just this past Sunday morning in church, the pastor where I was, where my grandson was just baptized, the
Yes,
pastor in his
congratulations.
sermon, thank you, the pastor talked about how real love really does act, and it acts at the cost of self-sacrifice. And he said, if you really think that you are pro-life, you ought to be able to say yes if some pregnant woman comes up to you and says, if you don't adopt this baby, I will abort it. And all over the congregation, hands went up of all these people saying yes, they would do that. And a couple of rows in front of me, there was a little girl, looked to be maybe 5 or 6 years old, and she shouted out, yes, I would. I was so pleased. It was wonderful to see that kind of reaction in that congregation. And this is increasingly what I see the pro-life pregnancy counseling centers doing, crisis pregnancy centers. They are not just giving the message that women with unwanted pregnancies, which do not equate, by the way, with unwanted babies, but women don't have to choose to put their children to death. They can provide wonderful homes for them, whether themselves with the assistance of others or through adoption. And so I'm delighted to see that too. Well, you mentioned how the march was actually postponed a little bit because of the inauguration of President Biden, and that just reminds me that a whole lot of people consider former President Donald Trump probably the most pro-life president since Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973. What were some things that he did to protect the unborn?
Mhm. The absolute number one thing that this president did was transform the judiciary. More than 200 lower court justices, and of course, 3 new Supreme Court justices, Amy Coney Barrett, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh. This was the consummation of decades worth of work that the pro-life movement has put in, alongside others who want originalist, constitutionalist judges, to get a president and a Senate that would appoint and confirm pro-life Supreme Court justices. The reason we are in the situation right now in this country that we're in, which is that we are one of 7 nations in the whole world to allow elective abortion beyond 5 months, is because of Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton. And we are seeking urgently the Supreme Court to take the handcuffs off the states and allow states to pass laws that are reflective of the values of the people that live there. And
Yes.
so President Trump giving us that incredible gift of a transformed Supreme Court and this emerging 6-3 dynamic that we're seeing, as well as numerous other uh, originalist, constitutionalist justices at the lower court level, judges, I should say. That was
Yes.
by far the biggest thing. Also, the Protect Life rule and the Global Protect Life rule, which are in jeopardy under this new administration. And in fact, we're expecting action from them as early as this Thursday.
Yeah.
Planned Parenthood, the nation's largest abortion business, voluntarily gave up $60 million because President Trump put into place the Protect Life rule. And not only the Global Protect Life rule had an even bigger impact on how taxpayer dollars are spent in our global health assistance funding overseas. Americans overwhelmingly don't want to send taxpayer money to abortion businesses, and especially not abortion businesses that are promoting abortion overseas, oftentimes in a direct contradiction to the pro-life country and pro-life culture that they've embedded themselves in. So we expect on Thursday, actually, that the Biden administration is going to rescind those policies, work to overturn them. President Trump gave us incredible conscience protections for Americans of faith or just, deep held moral convictions against abortion, doctors and nurses who don't want to be complicit in abortion. That all stands to be lost. So we are going to be working diligently over the next 4 years to call out the extremism where we see it and to point out all of these bad actions by the Biden-Harris administration.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so totally with you on all of that, and I'd just add a little bit too that in appointing pro-life judges to the bench, all the way from district court up to the Supreme Court level, it wasn't that he was appointing based on a particular ideology and a particular commitment to life. It was appointing in terms of a commitment to constitutionalism, to
Yep.
upholding the law of the land instead of judging according to one's personal preferences. And that is precisely what makes these justices pro-life, is that the Declaration of Independence, our charter, and the Constitution, our bylaws, are very, very clearly pro-life. And so if
Mm-hmm.
you're going to rule on questions related to that, you want to rule consistently with the law, the supreme law of the land, rather than pushing your own personal preferences. And I think that is what President Trump committed himself to, and he had the advice, the counsel of the Federalist Society, the Susan B. Anthony list, and various others to lead him to justices who were committed to that originalist, textualist principle of constitutional
Mm-hmm.
interpretation, and that's why we wound up with the wonderful 6-3 majority that we now have on the Supreme Court.
Yeah. And it's a question of our democracy also. I mean,
Yeah,
Roe versus Wade was a profoundly undemocratic decision. 7
yeah,
unelected men in a single day struck down and invalidated all the state laws that were limiting abortion at that point. And
yeah,
so it's incredibly important that we maintain this distinction between the legislative and the judicial branch of government. Legislators make laws, judges rule on the constitutionality of them. They can't legislate from the bench. And so we're hoping that sometime in the next, very soon, there are actually dozens of cases, litigation that's making its way through the lower courts and through the circuit court level, headed towards the Supremes at this very moment, and hopeful that they will someday soon rule on one of these state cases, and we'll start to either in one go or an incremental impact start to roll back and adjust abortion jurisprudence.
Yeah, yeah. Now, earlier this month, the Supreme Court voted 6-3 to grant the Trump-Pence administration's request to stop distribution of dangerous abortion drugs by mail during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, first, obviously, those drugs are dangerous to infants. They're meant to kill them.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure whether this is something that's thoroughly within your own bailiwick, how much you want to comment on it, but how are they dangerous to pregnant women as well? And why was this so important as an element in the whole pro-life work of our own time?
Yeah. Well, it's a really good question, and it's so important to talk about this because I think many people, even deeply embedded within the pro-life movement, don't understand the growing threat of chemical abortion. The you know the the pandemic has totally changed the way that we work, the way that we live as Americans, and there's been an explosion in telehealth and doing things from home. The abortion lobby is seeking to capitalize on this shift and to turn every mailbox and every pharmacy into an abortion facility where women can access abortion drugs without being seen by a doctor, without there being proper determination of where she is, at what point in gestation she is, and at her pregnancy. And they want to make these drugs more widely available. And it's dangerous for a few reasons. First off, the FDA has said that these drugs are dangerous. Doctors ought to prescribe them. They ought to make sure that they examine the patient before they receive the drugs. They're only meant to be taken up to a certain point in gestation. Otherwise, they risk the complications increase the further along in pregnancy. But also just the very access to these drugs outside of the doctor-patient relationship, we're talking about what's to stop. And there's been cases across the nation of this actually happening. Disgruntled boyfriends and husbands, people involved in human trafficking, accessing these abortion drugs and giving them unknowingly to pregnant women to induce abortion.
Mm.
So
Mm.
that right there, it seems obvious on its face, the threat to women. But these are dangerous DIY abortions at home. There is a significant increase in the bleeding and the hemorrhage, the possibility of hemorrhage. Bottom line, these drugs are dangerous, and we shouldn't be loosening the regulations around them. And that's what the Trump administration was arguing. In that 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court deferred to the FDA, which is maintaining the REMS, risk evaluation and mitigation strategies surrounding the abortion drugs. And it may be a short-lived victory at this point because we fully expect that the Biden-Harris administration will put pressure on the FDA to loosen the REMS and make these drugs more widely available. So there are things that the state legislatures can do, things that state health departments can do. And so I would just encourage anyone listening, watching, to pay attention to what's happening in their state with regards to chemical abortion and see if there's legislation there that you can support, because we cannot rely on the Biden-Harris administration directing the FDA to do what is right and safe for women, and
Yeah.
certainly not for unborn children.
It's ironic that the very people who are demanding on subjects like COVID-19 or climate change follow the science are completely ignoring the science when it comes not just to these chemically induced abortions and the risks that they bring to the mothers, but also ignoring the science when it comes to what is it in there that you're wanting to abort. This is obviously not just some lump of tissue, and increasingly the science of our age has has led to the opposite conclusion, that this is a human being, a real live human being from the very moment of conception. And, I've been noticing through the years that more and more younger Americans are increasingly prone to be pro-life. And I think part of it seems to be that they're seeing uh, ultrasound pictures of their baby sisters or brothers in the womb, and they're figuring out, yeah, that's a human being in there. And when they get to college age, or their 20s and whatnot, and they start thinking about marriage and so on, they just can't be fooled into thinking that what's there is something other than a real baby human being. Now, this recent decision then about the chemical abortions, the 6-3 decision, what do you think that predicts? What does that forecast about future abortion-related decisions by the Supreme Court? Is it likely, you think, that Roe v. Wade's influence is going to shrink through the courts?
I certainly hope so. In 2019, I believe it was, Justice Thomas, in looking back on a ruling, I believe it was on the disability discrimination abortion ban, they sent back they said they weren't going to deal with it, and they sent it back to the states. They wanted to see more activity at the circuit court level. But Justice Thomas said that the court is on a collision course with Roe. He put it very elegantly, saying that the court was going to have to take this issue up sooner or later, because this is clearly not settled in the hearts and minds of the American people. Otherwise, state legislators would stop advocating for laws to limit abortion. And so I do hope that soon we will see one of these cases. There is now a circuit split on the issue of the disability discrimination abortion that some states have
Mhm.
passed. This is lethal discrimination against children with disabilities, perceived disabilities in the womb. And Justice Thomas thinks the court should take that up and consider it at a first impression, that they've never dealt with something like this before. We know so much more about what's going on inside the womb than we did in 1973. We also know that the unborn child can feel pain at least as early as 20 weeks gestation. That's 5 months, more than halfway through pregnancy. We ought to limit abortion at that point. There is a whole host of new arguments for the court to consider. And I don't have a crystal ball. The only people that can tell us what they'll do on this are the justices themselves. They set their own schedule. They decide which cases they're going to take up. But we know that they care about public opinion. They care about what's happening out in the states. And so to see all this activity at the state legislature level, there's been numerous constitutional amendments passed in different states over the last few years that make a strong stand for life. And I think that we will see the court take up one of these cases. I think the 6-3 ruling was very promising. The Chief Justice Roberts has become the new swing vote on this, but I believe that there are very compelling arguments that the court hasn't considered yet, and we've got to keep that one in our prayers and just keep continuing to pray that they will take this up soon and make the right decision.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, friends, thank you again for tuning in this evening. We have more yet to come with Mallory Quigley, the Vice President for Communications with the Susan B. Anthony List, a wonderful organization that gives political support to pro-life candidates for office and pro-life members of state legislatures, of Congress, and so on. But I want to just remind you quickly that the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation is offering this month, as a way of saying thanks when someone gives a donation of literally any amount, to send free of charge this monograph called The Red and the Green, China's Useful Idiots. It exposes how the Chinese Communist Party is exploiting the environmentalist movement from the grassroots to the very tops of its major organizations in the West, in the East, in China itself. And all you need to do to request your copy is to go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, and as you fill out the donation form, when you come to the comments section, just enter the red and the green or promo code 2101, and we will be glad to send this to you, and 100% of your donation will be tax deductible. Well, Mallory, a lot of Democrats in the Senate now seem intent on eliminating the legislative filibuster to clear the way for pro-abortion legislation along nearly absolute party lines. Why has the filibuster been so important in the Senate for well over a century and a half? Who are the key people in the Senate opposing its elimination? And what can our viewers do to express their thoughts about that to their senators?
Yes. Well, the filibuster is so important because right now it takes 60 votes to pass something through the Senate, unless they're using a procedure called reconciliation, which is really used only primarily for budget measures, and that requires only a simple majority. Right now, we have a 50-50 Senate with Vice President Kamala Harris, who's an abortion extremist, breaking the tie. And it will only crazily, if that's a word, interestingly, it will only take 51 votes to get rid of the filibuster. And this is important to keep the filibuster, because if we allow the pro-abortion caucus to be able to pass things by a simple majority, then we run a great risk of having pro-abortion Chuck Schumer and Speaker Pelosi ram through anything that they can think of, including everything on the abortion lobby's wish list, through the Congress. And the worst thing that could happen is that they could expand the Supreme Court. I mentioned earlier, that this new 6-3 majority on the court, this is a culmination of decades worth of work in the political realm and in the realm of litigation to get this court in place. And just imagine if all of that was undone with a single legislative move to add 3 new seats or 5 new seats, completely diluting the work that we've been doing the last 48 years. So the key people are the moderates, the institutionalists in the Senate. Mitch McConnell, he had the opportunity to get rid of the legislative filibuster a few years ago and chose not to do it. He's very, an institutionalist in the Senate, cares a lot about the rules and the fact that it's supposed to be one of the slower bodies in government. And we have some Democratic senators who have come out and said that they oppose getting rid of the legislative filibuster. So that's Joe Manchin from West Virginia and Kristen Sinema from Arizona. So if you live in Arizona or West Virginia, make sure that your senators hear from you, that you thank them for their stated position. They've drawn a line in the sand, and now it is their constituents' jobs to make sure that they hold to it. And it's incredibly important. This would really change the government as we know it, destroy the system of checks and balances that the founders gave to us. And that's why it's so important. It's not on its face a pro-life issue, but it could be the first domino in really undoing a lot of the work that we've accomplished thus far, and prevent a lot of future successes.
Right. Mallory, 2 particularly important policy elements for the pro-life movement, running all the way back to the 1970s, have been the Hyde Amendment and what's called the Mexico City policy. Explain for our viewers what those are and
Mhm.
how the Biden administration is going to differ from the Trump administration in terms of how they use or don't use those.
Yeah. Thank you for that question, Cal. Yeah, this is really important. Right now, the Hyde Amendment, which is longstanding bipartisan policy, prevents taxpayer dollars from going to fund elective abortions within the Medicaid system. And so it has to be added to funding bills every year, along with other what we call Hyde similar, Hyde legacy type riders, the Weldon Amendment, the Dornan Amendment. There's different names for these that speak to abortion funding and preventing additional taxpayer funding of abortion. The Mexico City policy, or the global protect life rule, is an executive order that has really been turned on and off depending on the administration for the last few over the last few administrations, which prevents uh, us from sending taxpayer dollars to abortion businesses overseas that are involved in global health activity. So, for example, Planned Parenthood International and the Marie Stopes Foundation, abortion
Mhm.
giants in the abortion industry that promote and perform abortion overseas. Think of, health missions to Africa. They perform and promote abortions, but thanks to the Mexico City policy, the Global Protect Life Rule, they we have not been funding these abortion businesses for the last 4 years. So, and President Trump actually expanded it to not just cover
Yeah,
funding that was related to reproductive health, but all global health spending. Um, and so the posture of this new administration is, of course, very different towards abortion funding. Although taxpayer funding of abortion is on its face an unpopular position, even among people who consider themselves to be pro choice, this administration wants to force you and I and everyone listening and watching to pay for abortion on demand at by eliminating the Hyde Amendment and by getting rid of the Mexico City policy. An argument that I think is interesting that our opponents are using is that they say that the Hyde Amendment is a racist policy because it's primarily women of color who are participating and on Medicaid that are prevented from getting elective abortions paid for by taxpayers. I think that this is a profoundly racist argument and classist argument that what our government is willing to pay for is the taking of innocent unborn life, rather than getting to the root cause of that problem of why that mom thinks that she needs an abortion. So I've seen a lot on social media over the last few weeks. The Planned Parenthood, NARAL, Emily's List, and others saying that the Hyde Amendment is racist policy, and this is just a bold-faced lie.
yeah.
And it's incredibly important to understand what this policy is all about, so that you can, fight back when you see this misinformation.
Yeah, and granted that the rate of abortions among Black Americans is considerably higher than the rate of abortions among white Americans, one can say that abortion on demand is itself a very racist policy. It is certainly bringing death to far more Black than white Americans as a percentage. Well, after Barack Obama, while he was president, abandoned the Mexico City policy, President Trump reimposed it, prohibiting U.S. funding for non-governmental organizations around the world that do abortions or refer people for them. Just last Thursday, in prepared remarks released by the White House, Dr. Anthony Fauci announced that the Biden administration would revoke that policy again. Now, Trump also stopped funding for Title X programs that provided for referred abortion, leading organizations like Planned Parenthood to drop out of Title X. Biden is also expected to reverse that policy. Asked by a reporter about that, a reporter from the pro-life network EWTN, a Roman Catholic television network, Biden's press secretary responded that Biden, quote, is a devout Catholic and someone who attends church regularly, unquote. Now, I'm an evangelical Protestant. You're a Roman Catholic. How do you, as a Roman Catholic leader in the pro-life movement, respond to that? And how is the Roman Catholic hierarchy, particularly the Catholic Council of Bishops, responding to it?
Yeah, thank you for this question. That was an incredibly frustrating moment as a Catholic and really a very bizarre pivot, frankly, because not only did she not answer the question, but being a devout Catholic and believing in the church's teaching on life would actually compel you not would really force a very simple answer, which is we're not going to repeal the Hyde Amendment and the Mexico City policy, etc. Being a devout Catholic is in no universe an excuse for forcing taxpayers to fund abortion on demand. This is just flies in the face of our church's teaching on the sanctity of life. Archbishop Gomez, who is the head of the Catholic Conference, did put out a strong statement on the day of the inauguration, acknowledging, yes, this is only the second Roman Catholic president that we've had since our nation's founding. And while there's some things to be celebrated there, this does mean, because of his stated positions in direct contradiction to the Catholic Church's teaching on a variety of issues, that there are going to be opportunities for this administration to advance objective moral evils. And I was pleased to see that statement from the bishops. I know that they want to work with the Biden administration on areas where there is common ground, but life is a primary issue for Catholics and for the Catholic Church. Kind of gets back to the conversation we were having earlier about Professor Arks and the preeminence of life when it comes to the rest of rights that we're afforded in this country. So as a Catholic, it is disappointing to see a fellow Catholic really be causing scandal by supporting positions that are antithetical to what our church teaches.
Yeah. Yeah. And, as an evangelical Protestant, I have to say, too, that I just find it absolutely inexplicable how anyone can reconcile biblical faith with support for abortion on demand. We have the clear command in the Ten Commandments: you shall not kill, you shall not murder. And if there is any situation where we're taking the life of an innocent person unjustifiably, it is abortion. Well, it's been pretty predictable ever since Roe v. Wade back in 1973 that Democratic presidents will pursue pro-abortion policies and Republicans will pursue pro-life policies. What about public opinion, though? How has that changed over the nearly 5 decades now since Roe v. Wade? Not just in terms of how people respond to surveys and so on, but particularly in terms of the rate of abortions per 1,000 women of childbearing age. What do we see in the way of trends in both of those?
Yeah, the expert on this is Dr. Michael New, who's a scholar at our research arm, the Lozier Institute. He's a statistician that is always tracking the trends out from the CDC and from directly looking at state abortion reports. The assessment overall is that Americans are increasingly choosing life when faced with unplanned pregnancies. Another of my fellow Catholics who said something kind of abhorrent, quite abhorrent actually, on Friday is Speaker Pelosi in a conversation with Hillary Clinton on their podcast. And, they were quick to point out a stat that they think is important, that that abortion rates dropped in the 90s and that was due to contraception. Well, the reality is that while contraception use did shoot up in the 90s, the number of unplanned pregnancies has really just has fluctuated uh, since during that time and since. But when you're looking at the rate of unplanned pregnancies compared to the rate of abortion, we find that women are increasingly choosing life when they're in this circumstance. And I think that that speaks to another poll, the increase in the number of Americans who are self-identifying as pro-life. And really, when we just look at the public opinion polling on pro-life policy, there is huge support for our top legislative priority right now, which is at the state and federal level, which is stopping abortion after 5 months. More than halfway through pregnancy, a point by which at least the baby can feel pain at that point. Many survive outside the womb. Micah Pickering is a little boy that we found in a New York Times article about preemie babies. He was born at 20 weeks gestation. He was the size smaller than a bag of peanut M&Ms. And I've met him. He's, I believe, 7 years old now, doing great, has a little sister, just as rambunctious as any other little boy. And so Americans are on board with
Yeah.
passing that legislation at the federal level. Women in higher numbers than men, African Americans, Hispanics, Democrats, even people that consider themselves to be pro-choice, recognize that there is a line at which we should agree and can agree and do agree that we should not have abortions beyond this point. And so that polling has only remained steady, especially over the last 6 or 7 years or so. And I think all this points in a really hopeful direction, that America is an increasingly pro-life nation. Like I said earlier, there is profound unrest in the hearts and minds of the American people on this issue, precisely because our current status quo is so extreme and so far outside the international norms. I mean, we stand alongside China and North Korea in allowing abortions so late in pregnancy, indeed all the way up until the moment of birth, as my governor here in the Commonwealth of Virginia noted last year, saying that, well, if babies born alive should be left to die, essentially. So given all that, given the reality of women choosing life, being supported by the pregnancy center movement, the public opinion polling on actual legislative priorities, and then also on the question of where do we want abortion policy made, in the courts or at the state legislature level. There's lots of encouraging nuggets of information in the polling and in the social
Yeah.
science research on this.
Yeah. Yeah. What are the odds that you would have raised issue of the child born at 20 weeks with an interviewer who can say, I have a nephew who was born at 20 weeks. We have a
Is that right?
photograph of him lying in his father's palm, the palm of his father's hand. And he's now, I guess he's about 30 years old and a very productive young man. And the idea that we would just snuff out a life at 4, 5, 6 months along in gestation is simply uh, inexplicable. And I think increasingly people are seeing that as more and more very prematurely born babies are surviving and growing to be strong, healthy adults. People are saying, no, 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 this just doesn't make sense
Yeah.
to
I
go and
I think that I've been reflecting on this with some of my friends. I forget why we were talking about this, but when you consider that we can only have advances in medicine if we try, um,
right.
that you can't just theorize about something that you've never dealt with and come up. You can't solve a problem that you've never seen. And I think about Representative Jamie Herrera Butler from Washington State, who's a pro-life member of Congress, one that we've helped elect. She was pregnant a few years ago, and her child was diagnosed in the womb with Potter syndrome, which if I remember correctly, is an affliction of the kidneys where the
Mm.
kidneys don't grow, so the baby doesn't. There's not enough saline solution in the womb, and it can impact the ability of the baby won't grow their lungs, and so they don't often make it all the way through 9 months. And she was urged to abort, and she and her husband said, no, we can't do this, we can't give up on our child. And so they went to hospital after hospital, I think finally working with Johns Hopkins up in Baltimore, and
Hmm.
they came up with this revolutionary new treatment, actually, where she was going in for periodic injections into the womb to keep the fluid going so that the baby could stay in longer in order to grow enough, develop her lungs enough so that she could be born and survive. And she did. And this was a groundbreaking new treatment that now there's a protocol in place. Think about the joy of other future parents whose babies get diagnosed with this. um, you know how Who knows how often it happens, but for those parents and those children, how beautiful it is that now there's a treatment protocol in place that you don't have to say no, like you should just have an abortion and try again next year to bring a life into your family. I think that it's so defeatist and so anti-American and anti-science to
Yeah.
give up so easily on these problems, which are human lives. And I just can't wait to see what this little girl, Abigail, her name is. Her dad gave her, has one of her dad's kidneys, I think. And she's doing great. And her mom is a member of Congress. And who knows what that little girl, what her contributions will be
Yeah.
to her community and to our country.
That is amazing. And again, I can even chime in with my own experience. This grandson of mine that was baptized just a couple of days ago, early in the pregnancy, it was detected that he had what often develops into hydrocephaly, which can be a
Mm,
really serious, sometimes life-threatening brain development problem. And the hospital systems being as they are now, my daughter and her husband were offered the opportunity to abort, and they chose not to. And now, in some cases, that requires intervention, sometimes even in the womb, but it can be solved. And in this case, the problem healed itself over time. We had a lot of prayer going into that as well. Mallory, we're almost at the end here of our time. What are the big challenges that the Biden presidency brings to the pro-life movement, and how will the Susan B. Anthony list and allied organizations be responding to them?
yeah. Well, all the wonderful accomplishments that we saw under the Trump-Pence administration are really, a roadmap for the Biden-Harris administration and to undo. And it's going to be upsetting to see, some of the things that we just can't have an impact on, things that from the executive branch, executive action that we won't be able to stop, but we will be able to call attention to it, point out the extremism, use it as an opportunity to educate Americans about just
Yeah.
how extreme the pro-abortion lobby is, and we are going to be fighting very diligently, very eh, very closely to and watching very closely what happens in Congress so that we can hold back the worst threats, which would, of course, be the expansion of the Supreme Court and the destruction of the Hyde Amendment. So these are things that we really are going to need the entire pro-life movement, the whole church, frankly, to take action on in the coming year
Absolutely.
and to educate. to educate people within our own spheres of influence about what's happening, about the changes in our country, and engaging in the political process. This amazing tool that's been given to us by our founders, knowing that if we can ensure that life is protected under the law, that this will in turn change the culture, and that these two things work together. So stay engaged, stay hopeful, pray, and act.
Yeah, wonderful. How can our viewers get in touch with the Susan B. Anthony list, support it, become active with it? What do they do?
Yes. Thank you. Please visit our website, sbalist.org. If you are watching this on our Facebook page or the Cornwall Alliance Facebook page, click on through to Susan B. Anthony list, get in touch with us on social media, but really do, join the email list there. We're facing increasing censorship from big tech. So we'd love to be able to keep in direct contact with you over email, and you can join us at our website.
Yeah, wonderful. Mallory, thank you again so much for joining us this evening. It's been a delight talking with you. I am praying for the Susan B. Anthony list and so many other pro-life organizations. The Cornwall Alliance itself is not primarily focused on pro-life issues, but in a sense, because what we're all about is promoting human life from womb to tomb. Uh, this is an important part of our mission as well. So, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Uh, do you have any just last closing words for our audience?
I just thank you for the work that you're doing, and yes, invite you to to pray, to join the virtual March for Life this Friday, and to think about ways that you can just do one more thing in your community to support women in difficult circumstances and to support the pro-life movement. So thank you.
Great. Thank you again. Friends, next week, our guests will be Dr. J.H. Lair of the Heartland Institute and Mr. Tom Harris of the International Climate Science Coalition to discuss some articles that they've published recently that are some amazing challenges to the climate alarmist movement and are helpful in showing people the importance of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for promoting life, plant life, and through plant life, all other life on Earth. I would remind you that from now to the end of January, as our way of saying thanks when you make a donation of any size to the Cornwall Alliance, we will be glad to send you a copy of the monograph, The Red and the Green, China's Useful Idiots. Just go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button. As you fill out the donation form, when you come to the comments field, enter the red and the green or promo code 2101, and we will be glad to send you a free copy of this wonderful new monograph. Thanks again for joining us this evening on From the Stacks. God bless you and have a wonderful week.